A millionaire drank himself to death, and the newspaper headline said it best. The radium water worked fine until his jaw came off. That's not a metaphor. His jaw came off in his hand. His name was Eben Byers, and for 3 years he drank a tonic called radium dissolved in water because his doctor told him it would restore his youth and vigor. He drank close to 1,400 bottles. Here's the part that should terrify you. Radithor wasn't a scam. It was exactly what it claimed to be: real, certified, laboratory verified radium. That's what killed him. The one tonic in American history that wasn't lying about its ingredients was the one that dissolved a man's bones from the inside out. By the time doctors examined him, holes were opening up in his skull. He'd lost most of his jaw. His brain was developing abscesses. When he died in 1932, they buried him in a lead-lined coffin because his body was still radioactive. Decades later, in 1965, scientists exhumed that coffin to study him. He was still glowing on their instruments. And Byers is just one story, because for most of human history, the thing you were told would save your life was often the thing most likely to end it. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which one of these medicines is still legally prescribed today, and I promise it's not the one you're expecting. Let's go back further first, way further. Around 7000 BCE, Neolithic healers were drilling holes directly into people's skulls, on purpose. No anesthesia, no germ theory, nothing but a sharpened stone and a belief that this would release whatever was making someone sick. Here's the twist. It worked. Archaeologists have found skulls with multiple healed holes, meaning the same person survived the procedure more than once. Somebody in the Stone Age had brain surgery, recovered, and came back for round 2. That instinct do something dramatic to the body to fix an invisible problem never went away. It just got a new name: humorism. For 2,000 years, Western medicine ran on one idea. Disease was caused by an imbalance of 4 bodily fluids, and the fix was simple: drain the bad one out. This is why, for 2 millennia, doctors' go-to answer to nearly any ailment was bloodletting. It wasn't quackery in their eyes, it was science. Rigorous, respected, taught in universities, practiced by the most trusted physicians in the world. And it killed people constantly, including, very possibly, the first president of the United States. On the 14th of December 1799, George Washington woke up with a throat infection. Over the next several hours, his doctors drained him of an enormous amount of blood, commonly estimated near 40% of what was in his body, and he died that same night. Historians still argue whether his illness would have killed him regardless, or whether his own physicians bled him to death trying to save him. What nobody argues is that his last hours were spent getting weaker with every cut. And bloodletting wasn't even the strangest thing doctors did with total confidence. Rescue kits were stationed along the River Thames for reviving drowning victims by blowing tobacco smoke up the rectum. Apothecaries across Europe sold powdered mummy, actual ground Egyptian remains, as medicine for roughly 500 years. By the 1500s, a new poison entered the picture, with its own dark proverb. Doctors treated syphilis with Mercury, and patients joked grimly, "A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." The man pushing this treatment, Paracelsus, ironically also gave us the single most important idea in toxicology: the dose makes the poison. He understood the principle. He just applied it to a substance that poisons you at almost any dose. That mercury didn't go away either. When Lewis and Clark set out to explore the American West in 1804, their medical kit included mercury-laced laxative pills so powerful the explorers nicknamed them Rush's Thunderbolts. Here's a detail that sounds made up but isn't. Those pills contained so much mercury that, 2 centuries later, archaeologists used elevated mercury levels in the soil to locate exactly where the expedition camped. Now, here's where the story turns genuinely dark, because we're not just talking about misguided science anymore. We're talking about products built for profit, aimed at the most vulnerable people imaginable: babies. In 1849, a product called Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup hit the market, with a smiling mother and a sleeping infant on the label. Its actual ingredients: morphine and alcohol. Parents dosed teething babies with a narcotic, believing they were doing something gentle and caring. The American Medical Association eventually condemned it outright as a baby killer. Cocaine toothache drops followed in the 1880s, advertised specifically for children. Then, in 1898, one of the most respected pharmaceutical companies on earth did something almost unbelievable. Bayer, the same company that had just given the world aspirin, began marketing a new drug as a safe, non-addictive cure for coughs and even as a treatment for morphine addiction. They called it heroin, named after the German word for heroic, for how powerful patients said it made them feel. The same chemist, Felix Hoffmann, is credited with synthesizing both aspirin and heroin within days of each other, one of the most beneficial drugs in history and one of the most destructive, from the same lab. Marketing heroin as non-addictive was like selling gasoline as a fire extinguisher. It took a public scandal to start pulling any of this back. In 1905, journalist Samuel Hopkins Adams published an expose called The Great American Fraud, ripping apart the patent medicine industry. A year later, America passed its first Pure Food and Drug Act. But here's the uncomfortable truth this video keeps circling back to. Almost none of this regulation existed to prevent disaster. It existed because disaster had already happened. And the disasters kept coming. In the 1920s, young women were hired to paint watch dials with glowing radium paint, told by their employers it was completely safe enough that they were instructed to lip point their brushes, twirling the bristles between their lips for a fine tip. They ingested radium, one careful brushstroke at a time. Their jaws began to rot. Their bones turned porous and fractured on their own. Some reportedly glowed faintly in the dark. They fought back anyway, dying women hauling their own employer into court and winning a case that helped establish workers' right to sue over occupational disease. Grace Fryer and the others didn't just die, they changed the law on their way out. Meanwhile, doctors were about to attempt something even more invasive, not on the body, but on the mind. In 1935, a neurologist named Antonio Egas Moniz performed the first prefrontal leucotomy, what we now call a lobotomy, cutting into the brain's frontal lobe to calm patients who were violent, psychotic, or simply difficult to manage. 14 years later, in 1949, he won the Nobel Prize for it. Let that sink in. The procedure we now consider one of the darkest chapters in medical history was, at the time, considered worthy of the highest honor in science. Then, an American doctor named Walter Freeman took it further and faster. He developed what became known as the ice pick lobotomy, so quick and crude he could perform it in under 10 minutes, sometimes using an actual ice pick from his own kitchen drawer, tapped through the eye socket into the brain. He toured the country in a van nicknamed the Lobotomobile, performing procedure after procedure, sometimes several in a single day. By the end of his career, Freeman had performed roughly 3,439 lobotomies. One of them was on a 23-year-old woman named Rosemary Kennedy, sister to a future president. Her family arranged the procedure in 1941, hoping to calm mood swings and behavioral issues. Instead, it left her permanently incapacitated, unable to walk or speak properly for the rest of her life. She was quietly moved to an institution, hidden from public view for years. One of America's most famous families had one of its own erased by a Nobel Prize-winning treatment. If lobotomy proved that expert consensus can be catastrophically wrong, the next story proves something even darker, that sometimes the people in charge know exactly what they're doing. Starting in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service enrolled 399 black men who already had syphilis into a study, alongside 201 healthy men as controls. Here's the myth people get wrong. The government did not infect these men. What it did was tell them they were being treated for bad blood, then withheld the actual cure, even after penicillin became standard treatment in the late 1940s. They let it run for 40 years, watching, doing nothing to help. It didn't end because someone developed a conscience. It ended in 1972, when journalist Gene Heller broke the story publicly, and outrage forced the government to shut it down. A $10 million settlement followed in 1974, and it wasn't until 1997, 65 years after the study began, that President Clinton formally apologized to the survivors. Now, against every one of these stories of institutions failing people, one person didn't. In the early 1960s, a drug called thalidomide was sold across Europe as the safest sedative available, marketed heavily to pregnant women for morning sickness. It seemed like a miracle. It wasn't. It caused severe birth defects in an estimated 10,000 babies worldwide, roughly 40% of whom didn't survive their first year. It was a full-blown epidemic, heading straight for the United States. Standing in its way was a newly hired FDA reviewer named Frances Oldham Kelsey. The drug company pressured her. The safety data didn't sit right, and she refused again and again to approve it. She held that line for over a year against mounting corporate pressure, and she was right. Thalidomide never got approved in the US. She spared an entire country the epidemic that devastated Europe. In 1962, President Kennedy personally awarded her the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. One person's stubbornness saved thousands of children who never even knew her name. That same year, thalidomide forced a new law. Drugs now had to prove they actually worked, not just that they wouldn't immediately kill you. That requirement didn't exist until 1962. For most of American history, a drug could be sold with zero proof it did anything at all. That law only existed because of an earlier catastrophe. In 1937, a company released a children's medicine called elixir sulfanilamide, sweetened for kids to take. Nobody had tested the solvent used to dissolve it, diethylene glycol, a chemical also used in antifreeze. It killed 107 people, most of them children, before anyone caught it. The chemist who formulated it, Harold Watkins, took his own life in the aftermath. Within a year, Congress passed the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, finally requiring companies to prove a product was safe before selling it. So here's where this leaves us. Bloodletting survived 2,000 years. Heroin was sold as medicine by the world's most trusted pharmaceutical company. A Nobel Prize was handed out for a procedure we now call mutilation. Every safeguard protecting you today, every warning label, every clinical trial, every FDA approval exists only because someone, somewhere, had to die first to prove it was necessary. A few of these treatments even survive quietly in modern medicine. Bloodletting is still medically valid for a couple of very specific blood disorders. And thalidomide, the drug that caused one of history's worst medical disasters, is still prescribed today, under extremely tight control, for leprosy, complications, and a certain type of cancer. The same poison, still on pharmacy shelves, just finally respected instead of trusted blindly. Which brings us to the only question that actually matters. Not what they got wrong back then, what we're getting wrong right now. Every one of these people, from the ones drinking radium to the families trusting a Nobel-winning surgeon with an ice pick, believed completely that they were doing the responsible thing. So what are you taking, doing, or trusting right now that people 2 generations from now will watch a video about and wonder how anyone possibly believed it was safe? If this pulled you in, there's another video on this channel that picks up exactly where trust in the experts broke down completely, and it might be the most unsettling one yet. Go watch that next.